So today we're going to talk about dealing with strings and text functions. There's a whole bunch of functions you should know something about, but they're pretty simple, and once you've done a few of them, you'll figure out they all work pretty much the same way. And so there's the list over there. I'm not going to get through that entire list today. We'll cover most of them. And the ones that, the other ones, just look them up once, understand what they do, and then if you have to use them, you shouldn't have any problems. So all of the text functions are pretty simple. The assignment for next week, the two case problems out of Appendix A, and then there's another one here in the spreadsheet called Homework A that you need to do. So next week you have to turn in 3 files before the beginning of lab. All right, so let's talk about this. Oh, I always do that. I have this list of names and some information about these people, and I want to break this up into columns so that I can analyze it, I can do things with it. And so we're going to use some text functions to do this. What I have here are people who were born in Nevada, and we have their name, and then what they're famous for, their career, their endeavor, however you want to think of it, and then we have where they were born in Nevada. And ultimately what we'd like to do is we'd like to see the first name in one column, the last name in another column, their career in yet another column, and then their birthplace in yet another column. And we've got to split this up, and we'll have to deal with some problem stuff like that. So I'm going to show you a bunch of different techniques this morning on how to do that sort of stuff. So the first thing I did was I looked through the data, and I said, I need to have some way of telling Excel where something stops and something else starts. For example, when we look at that, if you read the first 3, 4 names here, you finally get to like, oh, wait, there's a name here, and then there's something that they did, and then there's this place, right, out there at the end. Your own mind can figure out how to separate that stuff, but we need to tell Excel explicitly where the name stops and the career starts and so on and so forth. So you look through this stuff, and you try to find a character that's not being used anywhere in the text, because we want something that has a special meaning. This is where the name stops, and this is where the career starts, and all that sort of stuff. And we don't want to get Excel confused. So I look through that, and it says, okay, the @ symbol is not used any place in here, so I'm going to use that as my field separator. And so then my first task is to get a field separator between each one of these fields so that we can properly break it up. So I looked through that, and I said, well, there's a name, and then their career, name, career, name, career. So I said, okay, what I want to do is I want to substitute for the second space in this character string an @ symbol. So after Adams, I want an @ symbol. Now, with only, about 17 names here, we can probably do this by hand. But if I was doing this for the entire United States, I'd probably have a list of close to 1,000 people. And so I certainly don't want to do that. So everything I show you here this morning is based on the idea that this is really a long list and not just a short little list like this. All right. So I said, okay, well, I don't want to go through there and put in that @ symbol after the name. And I can't use search and replace because it's not the first one. It's the second space that I want to replace. So I said, okay, there's a function in Excel that can do that. And it's this substitute function here. Substitute. I can't do this. See, if I do this, let me just do this. Let's try this and see if I can make this a little bit easier to understand for you guys. Okay. Try that. The substitute function. You tell it, here's a string that I want you to work with, and it happens to be stored in A3. And then it says the old text is a space, double quote, space, double quote. It says change the space, and then it says the new text is to that @ symbol. And then the instance number. And I put a 2 there, so I said, okay, find the second space and replace that with the @ symbol. That's all that does, okay? Pretty straightforward. And then I just said, okay, and then I copied the formula down, and it did what I told it to do. Now, these other things here, clean and trim. Trim says take the string that's inside that set of parentheses. So it takes that string, Eva Adams, whatever, and it gets rid of any extra spaces at the beginning of the string or at the end of the string. So, for example, if we had space, Ben Alexander, it's going to get rid of those leading spaces. Just cleans it up a little. Well, actually, clean does something else. It gets rid of unprintable characters. And we'll talk about that later, but there's some characters that don't necessarily show up there. They won't show up there, but they're a character there anyway. They're invisible characters, and that gets rid of those. Okay, that's all let's do. All right, so any questions about substitute function? Okay. Well, I did that. And now, then what I did is I copied this, and then I came over to here, and I pasted values, not just paste values, because here, this is a rather dramatic instance of where the displayed value and the stored value are different. What's stored in that cell is that formula, but not that name or any of that sort of stuff. And I want to go through and do some editing on the name itself. And so I just copied and pasted that. So now what I've got here is what I have is what I see. Okay, because I got some problems. It turns out I was a little bit hasty here in putting that @ symbol after the second space, or in place of the second space, because there's some people in here with a middle name. So these here in light red are wrong, and so I'm faced with doing one of two things. I can either go back and write yet another formula to do that, or I can just go through and hand type the stuff over. So listen, when you deal with names and addresses and stuff like that, you're never going to find a rule that covers everything, because there's people's names, just people's names, right? Like, you got Billy Bob and Anne Marie, and people with 2 last names or 3 last names or hyphenated names, all kinds of weird spellings and all that sort of stuff. You're never going to find a rule that generally covers everything. So the strategy here is to find the rule that covers most of the cases and then deal with the other stuff just by typing or whatever you have to do to fix it. So those will have to be fixed. And then down here, Lute, they know he's born in Nevada, but they don't know where he's born in Nevada. So that can cause problems. And then lastly down here, Sarah Hopkins was an amazing woman, and she had several things she was famous for, and so we need to fix that too. Okay. So you can do that stuff. Now, we're still not quite done here, because I want to change, this comma here is my clue that says that's where the career stops and the birthplace starts. And so in here, what I'm going to do here is I'll just highlight this stuff. And then since this case, I've got a comma every place I want, I don't even have to write a formula here. I can do it this way. I can go to Find and Select and do a replace, and I can tell it to replace the comma with this, something like this. And replace all. And I did that, and then close. Okay. So sometimes you don't need a formula to do this stuff. You can get away with just a good old search and replace. All right. So then what I did here was this is my final cleaned up version. Everything's the way I want except for Lute here. I forgot to fix Lute. Let me fix Lute. We'll just put an @ sign there. Okay. So then I'm ready to go on to the next step where I break this up into columns. So I want you guys to give it a shot now. On your P1 there's a list of people from Nebraska, and I want you to do the same thing. I want you to go through and put an @ symbol after their name, after their career, break it up into 3 parts like that. You're gonna have to do some by hand, and most of them you can do with substitute or whatever. Okay.